Pardon?
You're all zen.
I'm all zen. Hi everyone, Miranda here. So today we have the lovely author of One True Thing, Nicole Hayes, here in the studio. Hello.
Hi,
How are you? I'm good. I've already said how are you before, but I'll say it again. How are you?
I'm great.
You're
Thanks for
great.
having me here.
You're so well. I absolutely loved your book, and I think with what's going on now, especially with this whole Prime Minister saga, it definitely suits the moment to be interviewing you right now.
It does feel like that, doesn't it?
It does.
I wonder though if there's ever a time when politics isn't fraught and complicated and uppermost in our minds.
First off, I'd like to ask you, tell us about One True Thing. So plot, characters, and what do you think of the front cover? Now, I always ask this. There's a lot of mixed reactions.
I love my front cover.
Yeah, I think it's a winner.
Yeah, a lot of people. Good. I mean, it was really different to so it's the same designer who did the Whole of My World, my first novel. Yep. Even though they're completely different aesthetic. And I find it amazing that it's Christabella Designs, or Krista Moffat is the designer, and she had totally different sort of style, totally different feel, but each really perfectly matches the story and the main character, because Frankie's really quite brash and strong, and she's just very, very there, very present. And Shelley in The Whole of My World's, a little bit more washed out, a little bit unsure about who she is. So I love them both for very different reasons. But my favourite bit is that Melbourne skyline in the watercolour in the back.
I was looking at that. It's like draws your eyes so much just to that rainbow splurge of colour.
That's right. Like it just grabs you. That's been used quite a lot, that background in images for different publicity for genres and that kind of thing, because it's just got such a compelling mix of colour. So yeah, I love that. It is a Melbourne story, but I do think it's much more universal than that. I think it's really, I don't even think it's just Australian, but essentially it is about Frankie Mulvaney Webb, who's 16, and she lives in Melbourne. Her mum is the hopefully soon to be elected first female Premier of Victoria. She's currently in that role as the Premier, but she hasn't actually faced the election, which is something like Malcolm Turnbull right now. And Julia Gillard when she first inherited her role. So she's at that place where the people haven't actually voted for her. And they're leading into the campaign. Frankie is not interested in politics at all. She loves her family, but all she wants to do is play with her band, play music in her rock band with her best friend Cassie and her mates Van and Tyler. And, their main focus at the moment when we open the story is the Battle of the Bands that's coming in and winning an audition for that. Yeah. On the cusp of the campaign launch, photographs of Frankie's mum, Rowena Mulvaney, and in a secret rendezvous with an unknown young man.
The young man.
Go viral. These photos go viral, and the media just has, rumours fly, media just goes crazy all over it. And of course, Frankie has to deal with that at the coalface at school, and deal with it amongst her friends, where people are literally speculating about her parents' marriage and what sort of family they have on the front page of every newspaper, but also right across social media. And it's about her having to deal with the fallout of these choices her parents have made.
As a reader, I found the character relationships in this book very highly engaging, and I loved all the different characters that you had going on. I loved Frankie. I felt she was so relatable. Cassie, I love how you brought in the diversity of her being a lesbian. I thought that was really interesting, because in a lot of YA books, we don't get a lot of characters like that. So that's one of the things that I really enjoyed about your book. I also really loved Frankie's mum. She was just so wonderful and a real joy to read about in this book. I guess my next question that I really like to say is, how did you come about writing these characters? And you mentioned something at the back of your book about your girls and how your girls inspired you to write the character of Frankie.
Yeah, it doesn't always start out that way, but I do find Frankie's voice came to me quite quickly. And that is often the way, it comes for me. The character sort of starts to live and breathe first off on their own. But then when I'm looking for a bit more substance, that's when I'll often sort of reach into people I know or people around me, or even just me as a younger person. And I'm sort of scattered throughout different characters. But Frankie, really, it's sort of the guitar thing and the obsession with music. That's my eldest daughter.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so you brought in what she does.
Just a lot of, because she was learning guitar, still is learning guitar. She plays piano, she plays,
Oh, wow.
She loves her music.
Amazing.
She really has a really eclectic range of interests in music as well.
Yeah.
So I drew on her a lot for the musical influence. She's changed now. She's kind of a little bit more open to stuff that's happening around her.
Oh, good.
Than she was. But at that age, she was 15 roughly when I was writing this.
Yeah.
She was not interested in politics at all. And her best friend is, you know, from years since they were tiny, is really passionately into politics. So the way that they had this friendship was so interesting to me that they still find this way to connect even though they've got such different interests.
And that's a bit like Frankie and Kessie in a way.
It is a bit like Frankie and Kessie, yes. Like Kessie also is kind of a little bit like me when I was younger, because I was hugely into politics as a teenager in a really unhealthy way. It was football and politics and music basically. So I'm spread across both those characters. Yeah, different music. I wasn't Pearl Jam. I don't think was even around then. But at the time, you know, I was quite obsessed with Cold Chisel. That was my band, and politics and footy filled my whole life. And I suspect a little, you know, because I was a little rabid about it all, a bit boring to be around sometimes. Any kind of obsession is so interesting to the person who's obsessed, but not always interesting to the people around them. And that's why I had a lot of fun with Kessie. In terms of her being gay, I'm not gay, but so many of my friends are. And so I felt really confident writing about having a best friend who's gay. That's a world that I'm really comfortable being in. Somebody referred to it as incidental diversity because, you know, Van is Vietnamese. Well, and sort of that whole mix. Yes. Everybody's from somewhere else in Melbourne, and that's just kind of the way we are. So that is really just reflecting the life that I know and the people that are around me. It just felt truer to be able to reproduce characters or create characters who felt like people I knew.
Your own personal experiences and everything.
And I have to say Luke, who's Frankie's little brother.
He's just adorable. I feel like just going through the book and just going,
He
so good.
was so much fun writing him, but he was really based on my youngest daughter. When she was 10, she's 12 now and she's way cooler than that. But when she was 10, she doesn't have asthma, which is Luke's big sort of burden to carry. But she was, in particular at that age, very unfiltered in her thoughts. And she said exactly what she was thinking, and often what we were thinking but never feel comfortable saying. And writing Luke and being able to express some of the stuff or include some of the stuff that Emily has said in her younger years was a lot of fun.
That's good.
Time with that.
I love how you actually brought in real life people, because a lot of authors, they do bring in real life people, but sometimes they make them up as well. Yeah. So just hearing your relationship, you know, to the characters that you wrote is really good.
I mean, it's true. They do have bits of people, but there's a point where they just, once they're in the story, they just take on a life of their own. Yeah. And so they do separate quite clearly. And of course, Luke's a boy, and you know, my daughter's got older, and Luke never will get older. Eventually, they have to play a role in the story, so it naturally kind of becomes its own thing then. But it gives me something to kind of base my, you know, when I am fleshing out my characters, gives me an opportunity to kind of test out possibilities, and a lot of the time that's finding it in people I know.
This book has a really high emphasis on politics, since Frankie's mum is running to be next Premier of Victoria. What research did you do in terms of, also as well, because you talked a lot about how, you know, the media influenced Frankie growing up, because she felt like she couldn't do what she wanted because someone was always taking a photo of her. What research did you do in terms of writing the book?
My undergraduate degree, I majored in media studies and politics. They were my double major.
Yes, media studies. I feel so well.
Yeah, so in terms of the workings of politics, and it is very much in the background, the politics. It's really, politics in my mind is really about relationships and perceptions. That's the focus, which is really what's more interesting in story than, you know, how the water bill and you know, all that stuff is really important. But when it comes to storytelling, it's just a mechanism to tell the more interesting story, which is how people relate to each other and the effects it has on individuals. There's, you know, the unique individual story is the one that matters to me the most. So in terms of research, I had a very solid understanding of the power of the media and politics and the political system here, how it works, just, you know, from my own interest. And like I said, I'm a political junkie too, so I watch every TV show that has.
Did you watch the election the other day?
I did, yeah. That's my idea of a good time. And I must admit, it felt a little bit flatter this last one, but as a rule, I have to say I'm very engaged in the political system. I also did interview some media advisors for different politicians.
Oh, wow.
The Premier in particular, different premiers. They've been advisors for different premiers to clarify in terms of things like what sort of access the media would have to the family.
Yes.
Some of that stuff that's a little bit harder to know and has been a changing thing, given how the social media and blogging, independent media has changed the face of how the news is delivered nowadays.
Definitely.
I know a lot of people who never watch TV or read newspapers anymore. You know, just by being sort of aware and interviewing professionals who are working in that space now, that helped me check, you know, plausibility of particular circumstances and also what the ethics of politicians' families, what's involved in that. Because when you're dealing with minors, with children, and Luke is particularly a minor, Frankie is 16, so that's actually a cusp, a threshold in terms of what you're allowed to do. A child's independence at 16 shifts. So I had to just check some of that stuff through interview and research. But the rest of it really came from my own quite obsessive interest over the years.
It's funny, definitely in this book, even how the media spins stories, and he really brought that out so well. I was really, on my take, because I can't really spoil it for those people that haven't read it, but that whole scandal and how that just blew up so much, I felt so sorry for Frankie's mum and even Frankie herself, because it put her in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, it really did. And I've had the amazing experience of being right at the wrong side of that. Very recently, I'm part of a podcast called The Outer Sanctum. And we were involved in breaking the Eddie Maguire, Caroline Wilson controversy. Yes. Inadvertently, I mean, we were just doing our podcast as we ordinarily would do. We were concerned about that particular incident and we talked about it, and through various mechanisms it got a lot of traction, and next thing you know, it's front page news. And I found it we were being interviewed and asked about, you know, the process and what happened and why we did it and that sort of thing. And it was so interesting to see how different aspects of the media reported exactly the same answers.
Wow.
And how they actually changed and speculated on things, even questions that we had answered flat out no or yes to, that they then disregarded those answers and speculated regardless. It was really interesting to see the Australian did that in particular, whereas the Fairfax media were very true to our interviews. But some bloggers, some various individuals just went off and made up their own story, despite us giving them the correct, you know, the actual answer. Yeah. It really just was so interesting to be on the other side of that and to actually see point blank how they can completely disregard knowledge that they have, information, and tell their own story because they've got a narrative they want to tell.
Yeah.
And if the truth doesn't fit that narrative, they'll just make it up.
It's a little ridiculous, isn't it?
It's a little frightening because these are mainstream media as
well,
well, which has a code of ethics, has all these rules that they're supposed to be following, and clearly just threw them out the window because it didn't fit the story they wanted to tell. Yeah.
And even bringing that into the book, how it affected the family as well. Like, it wasn't just Frankie's mum, it was also her husband as well. How do you go about Frankie's dad and that whole character and writing his opinion on what was happening with the scandal?
He came to me in pieces because initially I had a very strong sense of the relationship he had with Frankie. They're very close.
Yes.
And I really had a strong kind of understanding of how that was going to work and what it would look like on the page, and I really enjoyed writing those scenes. When I first did my early drafts of One True Thing, he disappeared.
Oh.
And I just didn't know how and I just sort of didn't know how to weave him in initially. So it became this thing that I had to kind of bring Brantley back. I lost him for a while and I had to give him a job. But in the end I thought, you know what? He's not coping with this either. And he's effectively absent. And he's an author, and he disappears to do his retreat, which he was intending to do anyway, to work on his book, which is on deadline, and that was fun to be able to kind of express my frustration, how that sometimes gets in the way of life every now and then. Deadlines can do that. It gave me a way of kind of justifying his absence, but also highlighting the fact that in the end, Frankie had to deal with a lot of that on her own. Her mum, she's not talking to her mum. She's angry with her mum because her mum refuses to clarify the rumours, refuses to respond to them at all.
I thought that was really strong of her as well.
Did you?
Yeah.
It's so interesting that everyone who's young who reads that thinks it's great.
Really?
And parents and mothers think that she abandoned her daughter.
Really?
Yes. I've had a completely different... Young people love Rowena.
Yeah,
And
I love
parents
her.
don't. And it's
Wow.
been so interesting because I love her.
Yeah.
I think she does the best that she can do while still being true to herself. I mean, she's flawed. There's no doubt about that. Interesting how people read that differently.
With the whole Rowena thing, that she kept silent because she wanted the media to find out the truth in their own time. Is that how you wrote it? Like, did you
In
want
my
her to
mind,
remain
she was
silent?
on principle.
Yeah.
She would not countenance. Like, she just did not want to justify their rumour and their scandal, their appalling kind of sense of entitlement to this part of her life. She's by answering it, so by responding to it. But also, she is protecting, in her mind, protecting her family. Even though it doesn't seem like that for a lot of the story, there is a point where you can at least appreciate where she's coming from. Yeah. So it's a bit of a diluted sense of responsibility, but it does come from a really powerful sense of responsibility, and probably some guilt too.
So Frankie's love of music is woven into this book. Did you originally want to have the theme, like a theme of politics running with the music?
The music thing is something that a lot of my stories have, not necessarily music, but an art form. I have found sanity and release in writing or in music, in some art form. For me, it's writing. I can't play music. I'm actually tone deaf and have no ability whatsoever. I rely entirely on my daughter both of my daughters love music. I love to listen to it. I love the way it makes me feel. I know as a teenager, as a young person, I relied on music and also some writing. I used to write lyrics and, attempt to write songs or poetry, really bad poetry. And eventually stories gave me incredible release and a sense of power that I perhaps didn't have in the real world. So I'm a huge advocate for the arts as an avenue for young people and really all people to express their creativity, but also to give them a sense of control over something. Yep. So all of my characters have some kind of artistic outlet, even if they haven't worked it out yet. They generally will at some point, or they haven't perhaps acknowledged its role, but it's still there if you want to look for it. It was always going to be there from that point of view, but once I started writing it, and this happens all the time with my books, some of the themes start to overlap and they actually speak to each other. So that whole idea of music and creating that empowerment,
what I was getting at,
that it actually is, and perception and changing the message and saying what you want to say and being aware that what you want to say isn't always what people are hearing. That plays out in politics as well. So, and that's all an accident. I'd like to say I designed it that way.
Through all the politics in the book, the music really balances that out. And even with the band as well, how they bring that into it, I thought it was really smart.
Yeah, right. Well,
no politics.
That's it. Well, that's the name of her band, is No Politics, because Frankie is, absolutely hates politics, and that's her space. But they also make fun of her for being so obvious about it as well.
That's true.
My husband gave me that title, actually. I was saying,
really?
I want a band name that's like really anti-politics. And he said, okay, no politics. I'm like,
it's so straightforward. Just think of that in the first place.
Of course, there's no such thing as no politics. Even in friendship groups, there's an aspect of politics.
There's always politics in everything that you do
unless
in life.
you live in a cave on your own, there is politics. It's about people.
Who's your favourite character in One True Thing? And your favourite moment and why?
Okay, so it's very hard to do favourite characters because I loved writing them all. But in terms of how easily the character came to me, possibly Luke. Yeah. And because I don't want to pick Frankie or Kessie, I can't. And Jake's pretty hot. I really he's pretty hot. Gorgeous.
He's pretty good. He's pretty good that
I
one.
love Jake. I really enjoyed all of these characters in a way that perhaps I found it in The Whole of My World. There are a couple of characters I really had trouble sitting with because I had to have them as difficult characters. But all of these ones I would have hung out with everyone in One True Thing if they'd have me. I suspect they might not, but that's okay. They were all the people I loved being with. But Luke was the most fun in that I could really just say all those things. And he
get away with it.
And get away with it. All that stuff that you know you shouldn't say and that you can't think. You're not even meant to think, but it comes out anyway. That was a lot of fun writing him. So he's probably the character I enjoyed writing the most. In terms of my favourite moment, it's actually probably going to be a lot of the musical ones because I'd never written about music before, but it also gave me the opportunity to express how it feels. You know, when Frankie's having those moments where she's completely lost in the moment,
Yeah.
that is the closest I can get to what it feels like to be writing something and knowing you're writing something well. Writing is hard a lot of the time, but there are those moments where it's just sheer release when you've just written something and you've nailed it, and then you read it back and you've still nailed it, and then
True.
a month later you read it back and you've still nailed it. There is nothing like the joy I get from that,
Yes.
and that's probably the closest thing. So it gave me an opportunity to express that without actually owning it myself. My absolutely favourite moment was in the hospital.
Yeah.
Because Luke's asthma becomes a problem, and there's a crisis, and he ends up in hospital at one point. That's not really a spoiler because you can see that fairly early on. And I think having those people, the characters, forced to kind of deal with what's happening when they're so separate and isolated at that point, writing that moment was really challenging and incredibly satisfying when I got it right. That having to just put it all aside to be there for Luke in that way, but also having these characters who are one in particular who isn't able to express his feelings in the way a healthy person can. Having that kind of restraint, writing that was really powerful. I really loved doing that. So that's probably my favourite moment because it did exactly what I wanted it to do.
How do you write? Like, what motivates you, your thought processes?
I mean, I've been writing long before I was published, so I've got stuff I want to say, and people get sick of hearing me say it, so I write it down.
You write it down.
I'm also better at writing it down than saying it, so it gives me a chance to really clarify what it is I want to say. What drives me to want to write, but in the end, the story is what compels me to create, to finish a novel or to pitch an idea. It's about the story I want to tell. Yeah. So I've got those two things going on because in the end, nobody wants to be preached at. Nobody wants to be told this is how you need to think. And I often find that what it is I wanted to say shifts anyway a little bit. Yes. So there'll be no point me just kind of lecturing everybody. Boring for everyone, boring for me. But having a story that allows me to play those ideas out and test them a little bit, that's where I get enormous satisfaction from, and that's what drives my writing most of the time.
Do you drink tea or coffee?
I am a tea drinker.
Oh, a tea drinker.
I drink my tea in the morning, and I drink while I'm writing, unless I'm at a cafe, and then I have to have coffee because I can't make good enough coffee. I only drink. I sound like a bit of a but I will only drink really good quality coffee. So I only have coffee when I'm out, and I often write in cafes.
So that's when you drink coffee while writing a book.
It's all about the location. You can't mess up a pot of tea. Like if you've got the leaves and you've got the hot water and it's boiled just right, can't mess it up. So I do that at home. But the coffee has to be in a cafe.
What genres of books interest you, and any favourite authors?
I read a lot of young adult just for my own entertainment. I suppose I should for my work anyway, but I found myself writing those stories because that's what I was reading a lot of the time. So in terms of genre, though, I do love social realism. That's what I write. And, I love being moved by great stories. And so some examples of that, like Trinity Doyle's Pieces of Sky. I have really enjoyed some other different genre YA novels. So Ellie May, I know you've had Ellie on. I love her.
She's cool.
Yeah, I love her books. I'm lucky enough to she's cool. I've been lucky enough to read a manuscript. There's a couple of books that aren't out there as well as the ones that are, and I just love her writing. Anything she writes, I'd buy and recommend to everybody. Fleur Ferris's new book, Black. Actually, that's
okay.
Yeah, but I loved Risk. And Rebecca James, Rachel Craw, Gabrielle Tozer. I've read all of their books at different points, and I'm like hanging for the next one. Yeah. It's just
they're really great.
Really neat. I'm just dying to see what they come out with next. Australian, but women's fiction. I'm reading Leanne Moriarty at the moment.
Okay.
I've got her book that's not out yet, which is really special, and I devoured that boom, just went
straight away.
Yeah, and so now even though I probably don't need to, I'm going back and reading all of her stuff because I'm hooked. So her stuff's great. But Cormac McCarthy, Toni Morrison, that sort of stuff as well. Lionel Shriver, I love some American writers as well.
Yeah. Where is One True Thing available? Where can people go buy it?
I am so lucky that you can still buy it in most bookshops. If you're ever stuck, of course, you can always go to the Random House website where they have links to buy it online. But it's still readily available in the Readings, Dimmicks, Robinsons, all the independents as well as the chains.
When I went to Collins Bookstore, they were sold out and I had to order it in.
Did you?
Yes.
Selling out's good.
What is next for you? Any upcoming events or sneak peek on any upcoming books that you may have?
Both.
Both.
Yes.
There you go.
So I mentioned my interview with Leanne Moriarty at Readings in Hawthorne. That's in, I think that's 20th of July, late July anyway. And I also am doing the Melbourne Writers Festival. I'm doing a schools program, a panel with Kelly Gardner's moderating, and I'm with Randa Abdel Fattah. And we're talking about politics in YA. She has a new book out too. So I'm talking about One True Thing, and she's talking about her new book, which will be great because I think it's a fairly new thing to talk about sort of these kind of big adult issues. It's so insulting to say that, but that's how it's perceived. I think it has been perceived by a lot of the publishing industry that that there are a lot of young, active, engaged political teens who love stories that deal with stuff outside of their home and their immediate life, but also that reflects those things. I have a new book coming out next year in April. It's called A Shadow's Breath.
Ooh,
that
sounds really interesting.
It is. Breath. A Shadow's Breath. You think it's got like a bit of mystique.
Yeah, that's what I think of it when I hear about it.
Yeah.
I don't know, for some reason I think of a black coach and someone in the shadows. I don't know why.
Ooh, nothing like that.
Nothing like that, I just do.
No, it's set in a small country town, which I haven't done before. And I'm still, in the draft stage, so I'm still working through. It's called, a 17-year-old girl and her boyfriend are in a car accident in the mountains, and they have to kind of find their way back home. They're quite severely injured, and we realised fairly early on that Tessa, the main character, isn't so keen to go home, and it's about unravelling that story as they find their way to safety, hopefully.
Title for this book, it's not clear till the end of the story. That was really interesting as well.
Yeah, right. It's so funny about titles. That one actually I did get fairly early on, and Shadow's Breath, I had it really right from the beginning, so hopefully it plays out properly.
What about The Whole of My World?
The Whole of My World, the title changed just before publication.
Okay.
Yeah, it's still, it had a more footy kind of oriented title before, and it had for years and years, because I wrote that story a long time before it became published. But when we got to it, because football is the background of the story rather than the driving, it's about her obsession and about her family and grief. That's sort of the focus of it. We didn't want it is definitely about a girl who's obsessed with football, but that's sort of a metaphor for other things. And so the title we came up with ended up being a line from her own. So at least it's still my title, even though the publisher suggested it, from near the end where she talks about, everybody's and the whole of my world seem to care about the same thing that I do for once, and it's about her feeling a sense of belonging. So that came quite late in the picture. And also it came when I saw the cover, and because I love that cover.
Yeah, it's got a nice cover.
Yeah.
I've seen it out in stores and it's really nice.
So many people have said that.
Yeah, so it's fantastic.
Yeah, so there you go.
Next question is, if you could go back in time to yourself when you were little, what words of advice would you give about being an author? And did you always want to become an author?
About being an author. I had stuff, I didn't know it was going to be about that. I thought it because I actually, about being an author, the one thing I would definitely say is you've got to stick at it. Because I did move around a lot. I was writing from a young age, and it took me a really long time to get published. And I kept writing new ideas rather than trying to fix the ones and doing the hard work that's necessary in the revision process. So if you want to be a writer, be prepared to do the writing the book, those early drafts. That's the easy bit. Even though it seems hard, that's the easy bit. The real work happens afterwards in the revising and the redrafting and learning to kind of be able to separate out criticism, healthy constructive criticism from not so constructive criticism. Because I wasn't able to separate those well in my mind, I delayed that book becoming publishable.
All right. How many drafts do you think it takes before you get to a completed copy?
Because I tend to write on the fly. I'm a bit of a pantser, not a plotter when it comes to my stories. It means more rewriting later on.
Rewriting, yeah.
Yeah, because structurally it has to pull together. My new one will take lots of drafts and has taken lots of drafts because it has a dual narrative. So there's a past and present storyline all the way through. Yeah, so structurally it's really challenging as a writer to kind of bring it together to make those narratives talk to each other but still be equally compelling.
Yes.
And you move one piece and the whole thing falls over. So rewriting it, that's taking a lot of work. The first one and this most recent one took a lot more drafts. But that first one probably had 20 plus. Yeah, I completely changed the story. The main characters were the same, but I gave her a different backstory at one point, which is really what tipped it into publishable kind of, once I established that change, I sold the novel soon after that, after years of not being able to. But it required an almost page one rewrite, yes. I kept trying to fix it without realising that actually the problem was the main character, and giving her a reason to be obsessed.
Well, I'd love to thank you for coming in today and talking about One True Thing. I really appreciate it. And make sure to go buy her book if you see it out in stores. Cheeky Nicole has brought in this book for an international giveaway. Woohoo! And you signed it on the inside.
I did.
You said best wishes.
Nicole
Best wishes
Hayes,
there.
that's me.
Nicole Hayes, that's you. And you've added this bookmark as well. Two bookmarks. Oh, there we go.
I threw them in there. I know. Generous, aren't
Your
I?
face will be everywhere. It'll be like on a plane if the person that wins it is an international. So to win this book, comment down below.
No politics.
No politics. So there we go. If you're interested in winning this book, make sure to comment down below, no politics. I'm Miranda. This is Nicole. Thank you so much for watching. See ya!
Bye.